Markets were down huge to start the week as a result of a pending trade war between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. So, why do these three neighbors and the three biggest trading partners, why are their relationships starting to look like a bad episode of Breaking Bad? And what the heck does trade wars have to do with fentanyl and the borders? And the short answer is it has everything to do with it. And so, what I thought we would talk about this week is how what's going on with our two traditional, very strong allies and our two biggest trading partners, and how it fits into the overall framework of what Trump is trying to accomplish. And the reason we take a look at this is a show about markets. It's markets and madness and milkshakes, of course. But the markets and the madness cannot be removed from Trump, who is a force of nature. And we talk all the time about investing in the world that we have, not in the world that we want. And as a result, whether we like what Trump is doing or not, we have to stand back and analyze it in context to figure out what it is he's trying to accomplish. Does he have a point? Does he not have a point? And regardless of whether he has a point or not, how what his actions are going to do will affect the markets. And that is what we're going to try to talk about a little bit today. And so, if we go back to last Monday, last week, when we had our episode last week, we already knew that Trump had threatened to start the tariffs, I think, on Tuesday. And since there had been no alleviation from that, come in Monday morning and markets were down rather big. Now, I think by the end of the day, I can't remember if it was by the end of the day Monday. I think it was by the end of the day Monday, or at least first thing Tuesday. Trump had a phone call with both the president of Mexico and Canada, and they had agreed, Mexico and Canada had agreed to a few small, concessions in the short term in order to get a 30-day extension before the tariffs would become live. Now, this to me was kind of funny for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons was that people said that if Trump had just called Canada and Mexico ahead of time and said, hey, this is what I want you to do, rather than being a bull in the china shop and announcing that the tariffs were going to start and then waiting for them to come and say, hey, well, let's slow down a little bit. On the one hand, people say that's all he needed to do. On the other hand, they say that Canada and Mexico were already doing the things that Trump got them to do. But it can't be both. Either they were already doing them and he didn't need to do it or didn't need to ask for it, or they weren't doing it, and that's why they were so upset. But the other part of it is that if he had said, listen, I want you guys to do this, and we need to do it quickly, then under normal circumstances and under the way a normal administration would work is 3 weeks later, there would be a committee sit down to discuss the possibility of this. 2 or 3 weeks after that, there would be a follow-up meeting and a few phone calls to say, okay, these are the talking points that we want to have when we talk about this again. And perhaps by September or October, we would have a meeting between Trump and Trudeau and the Mexican president, and we would have some kind of a thing hammered out. But rather than that, Trump is who Trump is, and you just kind of have to accept it. He is using his bully pulpit to kind of get what he wants. And the fact of the matter is that it worked, and here's the thing. He got them to agree to move troops from Mexico to the border, and he got Canada to agree to, beef up their efforts on the northern border. And they agreed that over the next 30 days, they would kind of have some conversations and, make sure things were on track before the tariffs went into place. And that has kind of worked. And since then, and after those announcements were made, the markets rebounded. Now, what's kind of funny is if we get to the end of this week, threats of more tariffs were announced on Friday. And so markets kind of sold off kind of the end of Friday. And my guess is that we will come in on Monday and markets will be down because until we get further into the Trump presidency, and until we see actual data coming out from what his moves are creating, It is going to be a headline-driven market. So when we get negative headlines, markets are going to sell off. And when we get positive headlines, markets are going to rally. And maybe by the end of March or April, when we start to get some data that's coming in after Trump has been president, maybe then it won't be such a headline-driven market. But until then, it will be. But let's go back to the whole Breaking Bad relationship between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. I think probably the best way to put this into context is to refer back to a conversation we had on this program with Michael Every right after the election. And we talked about Michael's framework of the grand macro strategy and his point that there was no longer going to be economic strategy. And then in another silo, there would be monetary policy. And then in another silo, there would be a geopolitical concerns. And in another silo, there would be national security concerns. And that it was all going to be wrapped up into one thing at this point. And this dovetailed nicely into a lot of the stuff I have talked about over the last couple of years of us entering this Game of Thrones, right? The whole world has gotten to a point where they all have their own individual debt problems. We also have an issue where a lot of the countries around the world who have kind of been part of the rules-based order, for lack of a better word, have started to push back. Some of them were always on the periphery of the rules-based order. Some of the others were outside of it. And as a result of domestic economic problems, international problems are starting to bubble up. And so we're going to have, regardless of whether we like it or not, we are going to have, these geopolitical issues, whether because they're economic or because they're military related or because they are commercial related. It doesn't really matter. This is coming to a head. And Trump just happens to come into power at the same time and wants to make America great again. Now, again, we step back. It doesn't matter whether we agree with Trump's strategy. It is what it is. And everything that Trump is going to do, again, whether it is economic, whether it's monetary policy, whether it's domestic policy, it is all geared towards putting American concerns first. And if we want to be good neighbors, we want to have a prosperous world, but in his view, it's only going to be after he has taken care of the American homeland. And that kind of brings us back to Canada and Mexico. It's not a secret that he has wanted to get the borders closed. And he views illegal immigration as one of the cornerstones of doing that. And in addition to the illegal immigration, he, for a long time, even in his first term, talked about getting the drug trade under control, the flow of drugs over the border under control. So this is not a new issue for Trump. It's just that it's all wound up into one thing right now. Rather than having one meeting regarding tariffs and another meeting regarding immigration and one meeting regarding the drug trade, it's all one meeting now. And so when you think of it in that terms, it starts to make more sense. Now, is it a little bit crude? Is it the way that, a diplomatically, the way a traditionally trained diplomat would hang things? Probably not. But that's not who Trump is. And so that's just not the way he's going to do business. And the world just has to get used to it, to be quite honest. And I think the sooner you get used to it and just accept it and look at it for what it is and try to figure out what the results or what the consequences of him doing things his way are going to be, the better you're going to be able to allocate assets that are in your portfolio. So as we bring it back to the MCA, or the Mexico-Canada and Mexico-Canada America, trade agreement, and how this kind of all affects everything, is Trump is saying, we want to secure the border. That doesn't just mean from illegal immigration. It also means from illegal substances coming into the United States. Now, everybody already knows that this is a huge problem on the Mexican border, and nobody really disputes that it's a problem on the Mexican border. And there is another border that the United States have that most people don't realize also has a problem. And I've kind of been talking about this on Twitter over the last 24 hours because I'm a little surprised at how quick, I shouldn't be surprised, but it's amazing how quickly people are to point out that Trump is wrong and how quickly they are to Google, um, you know, fentanyl coming over the northern border. They find one article that states, a certain amount that was found, and then they use that as proof that it's not a big issue without having done any more research and without having done any more education on the topic as a whole. So that's one thing that's kind of come up. The other thing is people will say, well, this is America's problem. It's a demand problem. If Americans weren't buying the drugs, nobody would be supplying them. Not only that, but a lot of fentanyl gets made in the United States as well. And it's not only coming over the northern border, it's coming in from other places. And, just because, some of it came in from Canada doesn't mean it's a problem. But let's step back and think about that. Is it true that some of it is made in the United States? Yeah, a lot of it is made in the United States. Of course. There's probably more made in the United States than Canada, even though Canada has a huge problem, which we're going to talk about. And is there more made on the southern border? Yeah, of course. That's where the Mexican cartels operate out of. The labor's cheaper down there. So yeah, is more of it made down there? Yeah, of course, more of it's made down there. But that doesn't mean that it's not coming in from Canada. And it doesn't mean that China is not sending the substances that make the fentanyl into Canada. So then people will say, well, then why not deal with China? Well, he is dealing with China. He's already put tariffs on China, and he's threatened to put more tariffs on China. And last week, he put a directive out there where mail coming in through the United States postal system through China or Hong Kong is now delayed and getting inspected to a greater extent than it previously was. So the idea that Trump is only focusing on Canada and not going to do anything here at home and not going to do anything on the southern border and not going to do anything related to China, and he's making a really big mountain out of a molehill with regard to Canada, to me is a little bit off the mark. The other thing that I have found that people will say is it's not that, there's only, I think the number that some popular article cited was only 19 kilograms came in over the northern border. Well, first of all, that's not how many kilograms came in. That's how many kilograms were found and confiscated. The idea that they found all of the kilograms or the pounds or the truckloads that were produced in Canada and brought over the border is, of course, ridiculous. Of course, there's more coming over than they found. But let's take it back. Let's say let's say they found every ounce that was coming over the border. And they found all the 19 kilograms. For the people to say that's no big deal, 19 kilograms of fentanyl can kill hundreds of thousands of people. Now, and if you think about this, over the years, there's like 100,000 deaths related to fentanyl in the United States. And if anybody's out there saying, well, it's only 100,000 deaths, I want you to say that 10 times out loud and really think about what you're saying. Only 100,000 deaths. And the reality is it's probably much higher than that if you go over the number of years. But as it relates to Canada again, and for those who say it's not an issue in Canada and it's really only the southern border, and listen, they find a lot more on the southern border than they do in Canada, and it's not even close. And so therefore the argument goes, that's the problem is Mexico. And yes, that is absolutely a problem. I think it's like 19,000 pounds or something was found on the southern border. I don't remember the exact, so it's a huge problem, and that's obviously being addressed. But just because a much smaller amount was found in Canada, does that automatically mean it's not a problem? Well, no, because when you think about it and you actually do the research and you actually talk to people, which I have done regarding this issue, you find out that part of the reason a lot more is found on the southern border than the northern border is because they look for it on the northern border or on the southern border, and they hardly look for it on the northern border. So I'll give you some stats because people are always, well, give me the numbers. Okay, so here's the numbers. The southern border with Mexico is approximately 2,000 miles long. So it's not short, it's a big border, but it's 2,000 miles long. But the northern border between the United States and Canada is almost 6,000 miles long. I think it's the longest international border in the world. So 3 times as long, the northern border is as the southern border. Okay. Now, how many crossings do you think there are on the southern border? Well, before you look at it, I'll tell you, I already know the answer. It's 48. There's 48 crossings across those 2,000 miles between the United States and Canada, or between the United States and Mexico. Now, how many of those crossings do you think are guarded? Well, all of them except for one. And the one that isn't, I think, is it's like a barge, a hand-operated barge across the Rio Grande River. So you're not driving trucks across that crossing. So basically, 99% of the crossings across the southern border are guarded. Now, across the northern border, how many do you think there are? Remember, it's 3 times as long. Well, there's 3 times as many crossings almost. There's like 120, I think there's 120 crossings of the Canadian and the northern border. Now, how many of those do you think are armed or are guarded? Only 98 of them. So there's 20 or 21 that are not guarded. And the ones that are guarded are not guarded nearly as heavily as the ones along the Mexican border. So you've got a border that is 3 times as long and has 20 times as many crossings that are not guarded, and the ones that are guarded are not guarded to the same extent that the ones are on the southern border. The other thing is, if you look at the total number of Customs and Border Patrol agents, 82% of them are along the southern border. Only 10% are on the northern border. And the other 8%, I think, are along the east and west coast, kind of in maritime type Coast Guard type positions. So they're not necessarily on, either the Canadian or the Mexican border. So there's a huge disparity between how many people are looking for it along the southern border and how many people are looking for it along the northern border. And here's the thing. Now, this is really a stretch, so you got to have to stay with me on this one. You can't find something if you don't look for it, right? So the more you're looking for something, of course, you're going to find more. And is there more created in Mexico, and therefore they have to look for it more down there? Probably so. And I'm not denying that. Again, nobody's denying that the southern border is a big problem. But just because the southern border is a big problem, and just because the majority is found along the southern border, does not mean that the northern border is not an issue that should not be addressed, right? And especially when you consider the amount of money that is made in the drug trade, especially the drug cartels are they're money making masters. They make more money than any other entities on the earth. The idea that the cartels are stupid and are not creative and are not strategic and are not run by super intelligent people is just ridiculous. Of course, they are super intelligent, creative, and smart individuals running those organizations. Now, if you were a super smart, intelligent person and you knew you were trying to get your product across a border into your product market, would you prefer to go through a shorter border that was heavily guarded with one free access, or would you choose to go over a bigger border that is not as well, covered, has a lot more free crossings, and even the ones that do have guards are not guarded as well? Which border would you rather cross? Now, I think that's a pretty obvious answer. Now, logistically, it's easier, just because it's easier to do it in Mexico and drive across the Mexican border than it is to ship stuff to Canada and then, come down. But the reality is they make it in Canada. And they have these things all over the place. And so the idea that they only make it in Mexico and therefore it's just easier to bring it up from Mexico, that's not necessarily the case. There is some truth to that, but that's not always the case. And the fact of the matter is there are huge fentanyl manufacturing facilities in Canada. And it's much easier to drive it across the northern border than it is across the southern border. Now, does that mean it's easy? No. Does that mean that there's nobody looking for it across along the northern border? No. But the bottom line is, it is much easier to drive across the northern border than it is the southern border, and it's much less, harshly patrolled. And so when you have a lot of the stuff that the ingredients that makes the fentanyl gets shipped in to Canada from China, it gets created in Canada, it gets distributed throughout Canada, and Canada has a huge fentanyl problem. But if the idea that none of that comes down into the United States is pretty silly. I mean, let's be honest. If you are manufacturing a product and there is and you're selling it to this town that you're in, and there's a town right next door that has huge demand for that product as well, are you really not going to sell to that other town? Of course you are. Of course you are, especially when you consider the amount of money that can be made. So again, it doesn't necessarily mean that Canada is the number one place that fentanyl is being made, and therefore that's where all the focus should be. It's just that that's where some of the focus should be. So then a lot of people will say, well, then why didn't they just ask Canada to kind of take on this problem? Well, the reality is they have asked Canada to take on this problem. And in many ways, Canada has not done anything about it. And I know some of you are going to say, well, the United States isn't doing anything about it either. And this has been going on for years. And I would say you're absolutely right. But now Trump has come in, and Trump is a little different than the previous guys. And he is addressing the issue that has been going on for a long time. And it's also part of trying to make the entire Western Hemisphere Fortress America. And we've talked about this a little bit, kind of the gloves are, we talked about the rules-based order last week. And the traditional rules-based order was set up, post World War II. And on the one hand, it allowed global trade to flow more efficiently and for there to be global growth and globalization and more choices and lower prices. But on the other hand, it was also a system of control that exploited the weak at the hands of the powerful. And while that was always done kind of with a wink and a nod, what Trump has kind of done is saying, hey, we're not going to do business like that anymore. We're doing it differently. We're the biggest boy on the block, and this is the way we're going to do it. And that's totally different than the traditional rules-based order. And so what Trump is doing, he's not ceding hegemony. He's not backing away from the power that the United States has. In fact, in many ways, he's just pulling off the veil of altruism that was kind of marketed under the guise of Pax Americana or American peace operations. And now he's saying, listen, we're the United States. We're still the most powerful. We're going to start taking care of our own. The Panama Canal is not going to be influenced by China. And if necessary, we're going to take it. China is not going to get Greenland if necessary. We will make sure of that. And, we're open to buying Greenland, or we're open to annexing Greenland, or we're open to annexing, the Panama Canal if we have to. That's a much different form of hegemony than we have seen over the last 20, 30, 40 years. Now, again, it doesn't really matter whether we as individuals like this. It doesn't really matter whether we would like it done a different way. This is the way it's being done. And it's going to have really big implications for markets. And central to all of Trump's plans, and this goes for Marco Rubio, it goes for Scott Bessent, it goes for Tulsi Gabbard, it goes for Hegseth and the Department of Defense. Their number one goal is strengthening the domestic homeland. And then from there, everything is a derivative from there. And so part of that is making sure that your neighbors to the north and the south are not causing problems. Now, maybe the governments themselves are not causing problems, but there is a problem with people entering the United States illegally and illegal drugs coming into the United States. And they are going to have to do a lot of stuff domestically as well. I'm not saying that they don't have to do a lot of things domestically as well, but it is all part of the same strategy. Rubio was down in Central America last week and, got concessions from Panama. They got the week prior, they got concessions from Colombia. They got concessions from Guatemala. They got concessions from El Salvador. And they got concessions from Canada and Mexico. Now, the way they went about it, is that the perfect way to do it? Probably not, but it's the quickest and they're getting it done. And so I think that's how we have to look at things when it comes to Trump's policies. Now, for those who say he didn't really get anything from Canada or Mexico, well, let's say, do you think 30 days from now, if nothing has changed and illegal immigration is still coming over the southern border and still holes in the security apparatus on both the southern border and the northern border, do you think Trump is just going to say, okay, no problem? Do you really think that he's done and he's no longer going to enforce anything and everything he said was just a lie? I mean, do you really think that after all the things that he said, that he's just going to not do any of them? I think if that is your viewpoint, I think you're wrong. Now, you're obviously welcome to disagree with me, but I think that's wrong. And I think that rather than taming things down, my guess is that Trump is only going to pick up the pace. And so that's what this is all about. It's not, is fentanyl coming over the border the issue? No, it's not the issue. The issue is trying to strengthen the American homeland and be the strongest, both economically and militarily and geopolitically that the United States has ever been. That's the number one plan. But is drugs coming in over the border from Canada an issue that is wrapped up as part of that? Yes, it is. And so Trump is going to use the larger issue to force the smaller issue. And I think that is probably going to be very similar to the playbook that he uses for a lot of other countries and a lot of other ways of doing things, over the next 4 years. And I think we have to understand that that's kind of the new modus operandi for the United States. And I think that has big implications for markets. And I think some people will say, well, there's a lot of people who say, well, you can't treat your allies like that. If you treat your allies like that, you're only going to push them away. And there's absolutely some truth to that. Nobody likes to be talked to in a mean voice. Nobody likes to be treated badly. But where are they going to go if they don't go to the United States? Are the rest of the world, especially Canada and Mexico, are they not going to do business with the United States? Canada's biggest export is what? It's oil. Where do they send most of that oil? They send it to the United States. How does it get to the United States? By truck and by pipeline. Okay, so the United States stops buying it. Does that hurt the United States? It absolutely hurts the United States. We would have to start sourcing oil from somewhere else. But where is Canada going to sell that oil? Where are they going to sell it if they don't sell it to the United States? And how are they going to get it there? How are they going to get the oil from Alberta to Vancouver or to Ottawa or to the East Coast to then ship it to either Europe or ship it to China? You might want to take a look at Canadian energy infrastructure. So that's number one problem. So would it hurt the United States? It absolutely would hurt the United States. Would it hurt Canada? It would devastate Canada. Secondly, after the way Trump has talked, let's say that were to happen and they were to build some new infrastructure so that they could export that oil to somebody other than the United States. You think Trump's just going to sit back and let that happen? You think he's not going to put pressure on them in some form? You think there might not be some accidents at those facilities? Now, I'm not, supporting this stuff. I'm not saying I want this to happen. I'm not even saying that's the right way to go about doing things. I'm saying this is the political reality that we are in right now. It's the big game, right? We've talked about this before. This is the Game of Thrones, and it's the big boy rules, and it's no longer a polite world. And in many ways, I wish it weren't like this, but it is. And and I think that's where we're at. And the same goes for Mexico. If Mexico doesn't export to the United States, where are they going to export? Is there other places they go? Yeah, of course there's other places they can go. But can they sell it at the same price? Can they ship it there as efficiently as they can send it to the United States? Right? And so I think a lot of times when people analyze tariffs, they only analyze the impact it has on the United States. They never analyze the impact. Okay, so let's talk about the tariffs. Would it hurt the United States if Trump were to put these tariffs on Mexico and Canada? Of course it will hurt the United States. But will it hurt Mexico and Canada? Of course it will. If it wouldn't hurt Mexico and Canada, why were Mexico and Canada so upset about them? Right? And if tariffs are such a bad thing, why does Canada have tariffs on goods that come in from the United States to Canada? So I think a lot of times when people hear the word tariff, they immediately think bad. They immediately think bad for the United States. But as we've said 100 times, this is a relative game. And just because you get hit, nobody goes into a fight without the expectation to get hit. Of course it's going to hurt. But it's a matter of whether it hurts you more than it hurts the other guy. So I think that's a big part of what is going on here. I think it's a big part of Trump's overall strategy. And the last thing I'll say in this is people will say, Brent, you're giving Trump way too much credit. He's not that smart. He doesn't have some big 3D chess game. And you know what I'd say? You're right. This is not some big strategy, some big secret plan that he has. He is telling everybody exactly what he's going to do. Exactly what he's going to do. And the reason that people are so freaked out is because he's actually doing what he said he's going to do. And so I think, this is not some grand secret strategy that nobody can see coming. He's telling people exactly what he's going to do. And so far he's doing it. Will it work? I don't know whether it'll work. I really don't. I think it's going to cause a lot of chaos. But I think it doesn't just cause chaos in the United States. I think it causes chaos all over the place. And we don't know what the ultimate result of this will be. There is no way that you can go from doing business one way for 30 or 40 years to a whole new way of doing business without having some hiccups along the way. Even under the best case scenario, there would be some problems. But under the worst case scenario, there's going to be big problems. And I don't know if we have a good case scenario. I don't know if we have a bad case scenario. But what I do know is we don't know for sure what the result will be because we haven't done business like this for decades. But I think we're going to find out. And so that's where the madness comes from. In any case, I think I've kind of rambled on for a while here. I'm sure this will be a discussion that we have again. I'm sure many people out there disagree with me. I hope some people do agree with me, regardless of whether you agree or disagree. I'm going to leave this with one piece of advice. I was on a panel discussing this exact issue earlier this week. And I thought we were going to be talking about the market impacts of Trump's tariffs. And a couple of the people who were on the panel went on and on about how tariffs are bad and how the U.S. shouldn't be doing this. And, this is not the way that a polite neighbor acts. And my kind of point at the end was, it's not my job to judge whether or not he should be doing these or not. My job is to analyze the situation and figure out what the impacts are going to be. And I think the sooner the people accept that and start looking at the world as it is rather than the world as they want it to be, the better off your portfolios are going to be. I said at the beginning of the year, probably the word of the year was going to be volatility. I think that's the case. If I didn't say it then, I'll say it now. I think the other word of the year is realpolitik, because I think the reality of the new political situation is going to hit home for many people. And the sooner you can accept the reality of the world in which it is, I think the better off your portfolio is going to be. And I'll leave it at that. And I hope everybody has a great weekend, and we'll be back again next week. And thanks for being here. And the last thing I will say, I've started writing about this a little bit, We started the Macro Alchemist last year. Those are our bigger think pieces. I would encourage you all to go to macroalchemist.com, sign up, check out those deep think pieces, because I think they're very high quality. But we also started a Substack last week, and the Substack, these are a little bit shorter posts. I wrote 2 times last week about this very issue that we've been talking about here today. To find that, you can go to substack.santiagocapital.com, or substack.santiago.com. And I hope you, and the last thing I promised I would do, a friend of mine, Keith Dicker, who runs IceCap Management in Canada, he had a podcast on this very issue, the Canadian fentanyl issue that I referenced here today. And I would encourage everybody to listen to this. You don't have to take my word for it, and I know many of you won't. But those who are interested in this topic, listen to that episode. I'm going to post the link of it in the description of this episode. And I would encourage you to dig into this a little bit more, because it is a big issue, and it's a bigger issue than most people acknowledge it is. And okay, I've been rambling on, but I'm going to leave it at that. I hope everybody has a great day, a great weekend, and a great week. Go Chiefs.